Senator, I was wondering if you could talk about the Talmadge administration versus maybe the Griffin administration, kind of evaluate, maybe compare and contrast in what committee assignments you had and how you worked. I mean, how it was different with Talmadge from Griffin, and just the flavor of those two administrations.
Well, of course, during the Talmadge administration, I was close to Talmadge. I had voted for him when we had the 2 or 3 governor deal. So I fared pretty well in that I was a chairman of the Institutions and Property, which is comparable to Human Resources in the Houses today. And we were fairly active over there and still pushing for mental health, additional funds for the Millersville State Hospital at that time, and veterans issue had been rather popular. We had bills introduced to give a bonus to veterans, but of course it was voted down. At times it was brought up, but we did pass giving the veterans a free license, which was, I think, the only thing that the state of Georgia ever did directly for veterans. Of course, we did later build a veterans home. Now, when Marvin Griffin took over, people don't realize this, but I was in the House for 6 years. Then I was defeated by about 16 votes in an election that no one turned out. We had a young boy just out of law school, and he was trying to get name recognition, and we paid no attention to him, and nobody went to vote. But I got defeated, and I was out of the legislature during the first 2 years of the Marvin Griffin term. I served as Baldwin County Commissioner. At that time, I was reelected to Baldwin County Commissioner and served in that capacity for 12 years. Now, when I came on board, which was the last 2 years of the Marvin Griffin, we had an excellent relationship in that Marvin was very personable. He was a lot of fun to be around. He could tell the best jokes and the newest ones I've ever heard. And of course, he had pushed the rural road, and among those, it helped build the Veterans Home at Central State Hospital. Pete Wheeler was, of course, the pusher to begin with, and Georgia received the first funds to build a veterans home, a state veterans home, in the entire United States. Now, many of them have them now, but ours have been really enlarged upon, and at the present time, we're completing a new one for 150 beds. Now, one of the exciting issues during the Marvin Griffin time was, of course, Ernest Vandiver was the lieutenant governor, and he wanted to be governor. And they brought to a head the Rural Road Project. Marvin was pushing to enlarge it, and Ernest Vandiver had taken it as an issue to get his foot in the door to be the governor, of which he later was. And we had a big fight in the legislature over this.
The lieutenant governor was opposed to the governor?
The lieutenant governor was fighting Marvin Griffin, the governor. I was back in the House again. When I came back, I served 6 more years in the House. And I voted with Marvin Griffin. That night at the Capital City Club, Ernest Vandiver and his leaders put on a blowout to celebrate their great victory because they felt like that this was a main step towards being the governor. I was the only legislator there that had voted against Ernest Vandiver. That was invited, and I went. And I asked them, I said, why am I here? They said, well, at least we always know how you stand. If you tell us how you're going to vote, you're going to vote that way. And next time you might be with us, so therefore we're letting you come to the party in hopes you'll be on the right side next time.
Who was the highway commissioner at that time, and what part did he play in this?
Well, now, of course, I believe at that time Jim Gillis was still in, because Jim Gillis was being pushed, at one time to be the governor. And a lot of work was done for Mr. Gillis. Mr. Gillis was well known. He was a handsome, debonair, rural man, but he never was able to talk, make speeches. They were never able to get him to communicate, so consequently, Mr. Jim never did run for governor. But I believe that Jim Gillis was the head of the highway department on up until Ernie Vandiver took over, and then he retired.
Was Jim Gillis and Marvin Griffin on the same
Same
side?
side, that's correct,
He would have been
right.
opposed to Vandiver's
Of course, at
position.
that time, you had Roy Harris. Of course, Roy was getting a little age on him, but Roy Harris had been sort of the pusher in the background. He at one time had been a Speaker of the House of Representatives. He was from Richmond County. He didn't run later on, but he got a newspaper out, and it was very popular in political circles. And Roy was really quite a driver behind the scenes in electing Herman Talmadge when he first ran against Emmy Thompson, and then when he ran again 2 years later, he was back of Marvin Griffin when he ran. But after that, Roy Harris sort of faded, and new pushers came onto the scene. But as you know, Marvin came back and ran against.
Vandiver.
No, he ran against. It was 26 years ago. He's the attorney with.
Ellis Arnold?
No, nice-looking boy. Was in the Senate. Had been quite a leader in the Senate. Came from Augusta, Georgia.
We were talking about when
Of course,
Griffin ran against Sanders.
Marvin Griffin came back and ran against Carl Sanders. And of course, Marvin had been quite a racist the time he was in as governor. And of course, Ernie Vandiver ran on the same issue, of which you remember his famous saying, "No, not one." And he was referring to any black going to the University of Georgia, but he ended up eating those words many, many times.
I remember that
And
when I was a kid.
when Marvin ran back against Carl Sanders, he still was on the same tune, the broken record. And of course, people were tired of it. And yet they didn't turn the cover back, because during Marvin Griffin's administration, he did more for the black people of the state of Georgia than possibly any governor up until about, I'd say 12 years ago.
Governor Maddox, they both did more for black people. And
They worked very hard. They helped them in education. They helped them with homeless. They helped them with the needed, but they kept blasting forth that women, and consequently, they couldn't get the vote. But
do you think Griffin was hurt by the road scandal involving Cheney Griffin? Do you remember?
well, I felt like that he had to be hurt to some extent by some of the people. Marvin was such a nice guy that it was very difficult for him to say no. He's something like I am. We like to try to please everybody, and that's what Marvin did. And he ended up with Cheney, and quite a few of his appointees were questionable and caused a lot of newspaper flurry and people to wonder about Marvin. Yet Marvin was a good governor, and he did do a good job, but due to the questionability of some of his lieutenants, that and his famous theme, unless it's got to be white or it's not pretty, that's what he got clobbered very badly by Carl Sanders.
Did your committee assignments change during the Griffin administration?
No, I stayed on about the same committees. Like I've tried to be connected, of course, with mental health all the way through. We've tried to be connected with industry. Now, of course, at the present time, I have about the same with the Senate in that I'm on human resources. I have governmental op, which we handle all legislation that's dealing with state employees.
The committee that you're chairman of now, Governmental Operations.
Governmental Operations.
Were you already on that committee during the Griffin
No, now,
administration?
when we first, had no governmental op. They had State of the Republic, was a committee similar to this, of which I was a member of in the House. Now, they had the State of the Republic up until 2 years ago, and they changed theirs to Governmental Affairs. Now, our Governmental Operations Committee used to be the EREG Committee, and that's what I took over first, which was really the best job in the Capitol, next to being governor. The EREG Committee was created by statute, and at the time it was created, it had the right of subpoena, although this only lasted for 2 years.
Was the main purpose of that to reorganize state government? Is that what the
Well,
ERG?
well, it was supposed to be able to overlook the state government operation and to reorganize it where necessary. Therefore, you had the subpoena powers, which we need now in some committee in order where there's wrongdoing in departments, that you can subpoena the individual, and over and above the threat by whoever he's under, that you cannot go and appear. We had this happen later when the subpoena powers ran out, and our EREG committee was told of what seemed to be and appeared to be additional spending on automobiles that were unnecessary. And we had this more or less documented, but when we called on the people who had brought it to our attention, the state employees in the purchasing department, the head of the purchasing department told anyone that appeared before us that they would be fired. So we did not able to get the information, and naturally the head of the department, who possibly was a part of the purchasing, stated nothing was going on irregular. But this is the reason we talked today about we need an overview committee with subpoena powers. But the EREG committee, I could hire consultants, I could hire anyone I wanted, I could go anywhere I wanted in the United States that I thought was necessary to document the passage of certain bills or what other states were doing that we were not doing, without having to go through the process of getting the Lieutenant Governor or anyone else to approve it. But the ERE committee, when I got into the trouble of being indicted twice, as you know, once it stated that I was had promised to move a prisoner. Looks like prisoners keep popping up in my life because I have to help them at all times, the people that I thought needed it, or if there was a possibility of an error. Of course, this one came up in the Atlanta circuit, and I believe it was brought on. Slayton, who is the district attorney up here, refused to take the case. But the Atlanta Journal had a reporter who hung on with bulldog tenacity and kept writing about this case in the papers every day for about 6 weeks. So the federal jury indicted me. I think most people know that you can get indicted very easily with a federal jury. You can pick your nose with the wrong finger, and next morning you are indicted. So I was indicted and went to court, and of course was exonerated in about 3 days, but it cost a lot of money. And shortly after that, I was indicted by a federal jury in the Macon area on accusations by the then president, Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter stated back 8 years prior, when he was governor, that I had sent Senator Gene Holley to see him, that any time the GBI came into my senatorial district, because I was a senator at this time, that I would be notified. He was going upon the presumption that slot machines were in the different veterans clubs, which was not true. They had been taken out long before. And it was difficult to understand if I was doing wrong when he was the governor, why was I not accused while he was the governor, rather than waiting until 8 years that he was the president. Of course, Judge Owens, who is the judge of the federal court out of Bibb County, I was very delighted because I'd had a run-in with Judge Owens. We have that right regular. At one time, the company that Judge Owens worked for, prior to being the judge, I hired a young man named Renee Hawkins, who was an excellent attorney, to be the attorney for my corporation. and to take care of any tax problems we might have had. And Rene did an outstanding job for us, but he died very young man, 45 years of age, and the head of the law firm designated that I would use Judge Owens. Well, Mr. Owens, as he was then, was not very well versed on tax laws, so we decided to take our business to some other concern over there, and this is in my estimation, of course. Judge Owens never liked that, and consequently has never had a very good liking for Culver Kidd, and I think any time he's been able to sort of make it hot for me, he has. But we had the trial. All of us went up to the Oval Office in Washington, which Judge Owens sat in the top seat, and the then President Jimmy Carter was on a lower seat, and we made videotapes of the testimony of President Carter. We came back and had the trial in the federal courthouse in Macon, and I took them one day to all to vote against it, that there was no charges against me. But I was back again working at the Capitol. But in the meantime,
I mean, do you think your problems with Governor Carter had to do with your prior service on the reorganization committee and y'all's conflict over how state government should be organized, or is it more?
Jimmy Carter and he served 4 years in the Senate, and to me, he was as fine a senator as I've ever served with. He was knowledgeable, he worked hard, he was able to give and take, and we got along fine. But as Roy Harris has said many, many times, it's certainly amazing that you take a fine guy and put him back at the governor's desk and he immediately becomes a son of a bitch. And this was about my reaction with Jimmy Carter, that when he became governor, he changed in many ways, and of course the big fight was over his reorganization plan, of which we opposed, and made many, many changes in the Senate. The Senate was able to keep him from doing away with the Forest Department. We were able to keep him from doing away with the Veterans Department. We kept him from being able to take the hardware, the computers, away from the Labor Department. But we failed by one vote in preventing him from creating what I call the monster, and that's the Multi-Purpose Department of Human Resources. We were opposed to it, and I think it is shown through the years that regardless of who might be the superintendent or the commissioner, that it's too big a job for any one man.
How did his plan for human resources differ from what you and your committee had?
Well, of course, we would not have put all of this into one. Well, we thought that vocational rehab possibly should be in one area. We think that children's services should be in another area. And we would have possibly had 3 or 4 different departments rather than the one large one. Just for an example, when DHR first took over, it took 8 years before you could get a certified audit. I tried to keep them from funding DHR because I didn't think I could go back to my constituents and say, look, we put millions of dollars into the DHR, yet we don't know where it's been spent. But it was such a mixed up conglomerate that the auditors couldn't even audit. Now, of course, it's doing better. We do get certified audits. And we've had Dr. Skelton, who did a fine job, worked hard, and Dr. Ledbetter. It works untiringly. But I stated you've got to have your priorities. Are you going for physical health, mental health, children's services, vocational rehab, or just what are you going to be for, and how can you serve it all? And under this, you've got all of your adoption processes. It's so much involved, family and children's services, that I put in a bill 4 years ago to break it down into 5 different areas. When George Busby was elected governor, he spent 3 weeks in one of the motels here in Atlanta, calling in people that had been the commissioner of what used to be the old health and welfare, was the name of it before Jimmy Carter changed it. And Busby had drawn up a plan of which to change it back to 4 different departments. I was called in, Frank Pinkston from down in Macon worked on it, and we were very excited over that. We felt like we were finally going to put DHR in a workable position. But our thinking is that in the meantime, Jimmy Carter had decided to run for president. And he and his leaders, who he had some excellence here in Georgia, went to George Busby and stated that we're going to run on our reorganization plan in Georgia. Of course, evidently his opposition didn't come down and check into it, because it could have been a monster just like it's been for the taxpayers of Georgia. But anyway, he was able to keep George Busby from coming in and breaking up or reorganizing DHR, and today it's still the monster that Jimmy Carter created many, many years ago.
Let me go back just a little bit to the school legislation during the Griffin administration and Vandiver during that whole school. Did you offer any school legislation? You've offered a good deal through the years, Becky. I was just wondering if you offered any.
My main offer in school legislation has been trying to upgrade teachers' salary. You take 10 years ago, I believe, we've come a long ways. At that time, the average teacher's salary was about $8,000 or $9,000, and my bill was to have a starting salary of $12,000.
I first started teaching in 1968. I was paid $9,000 a year down in Newton County. You're exactly right.
Well, I felt like we were attracting 2 types of people into the teaching profession. One that felt like they were born to be a teacher. They were dedicated and of course did a marvelous job. The others were those that couldn't get a job anywhere else, so they became teachers just to be able to work. And I thought this was bad, and I think it's bad today. Now, we've got a $18,000 salary now, but here the teachers have to be our leaders. They're supposed to be the best. And we should start them at $24,000 to me now. It should be at least double for what it was in order to be competitive with the private sector. But when you give a 2.5%, 4.5%, 3.5% raise, you are really doing an injustice to ever think you're going to get quality education and not start paying the teachers for it.
1962 was the first statewide election without the county unit system, and that was the year Sanders ran against Griffin. I believe you ran for lieutenant governor in 1962.
Ran for lieutenant governor. Sanders and I were both running for lieutenant governor. It was, I think, 10 or 12 of us to begin with, and Sanders and I made a talk out in Decatur before one of the civic clubs, and we had a group that said one of us ought to run for governor. And I had one of the big wheels throughout the state of Georgia, a gentleman that ran the CNS Bank here at that time.
Mr. Lane? Mills Lane?
Mills Lane, and he was calling me, and I felt like he was going to back somebody. But I was busy running up and down trying to talk. By the time I got back with Mills Lane, he'd gotten hold of Carl Sanders, and of course he ran Carl, and Carl was elected. I went ahead.
Was that election close? Did you support Governor Griffin, or did you support Sanders?
Well, I was supporting myself. I was running up and down the road so bad, and of course it was 9 of us in that race, and we all felt that Peter Zach Gear, who had the support. Now, Mr. Gillis was still in charge of the highway. He was supporting Peter Zach. You had the head of the Game and Fish Department. But all of them were supporting Peter Zach.
Garland Bird, was he in that?
Well, Garland Bird wasn't here at that time. You know, Garland Bird had been the lieutenant governor, and then he planned to run for governor, raised a lot of money, and then had a rather suspicious heart attack. that nobody could tell just what happened, but then he got out of politics, never did come back. But I ran in the lieutenant governor's race and felt like I would get in a runoff with Peter Zach, but it turned out that Lester Maddox got in the runoff. My feeling was that if I got in the runoff, the news media would support me. They wouldn't support Peter Zach. As it was, they supported Peyton Hawes in the primary election, and of course in the runoff they didn't support anybody. But Peter Zach won it, but that was the year that we went to the court stated that the Senate was not a continuing body and had to be reapportioned. So we had a special session of the General Assembly and reapportioned the Senate into a continuing body. So the same year that I ran, which was 26 years ago, this year, I ran for the Senate. I'd already made my race for lieutenant governor and been defeated. Of course, I took my area overwhelmingly. But I had a bad situation in my senatorial district, which is considerably different today, in that 3 people had been elected to be senators, but the courts had kicked them all out of office. So one of those 3 thought they should be the senator, and I had already called on them to support me for lieutenant governor, and I should run. But being the independent I consider myself to be, I went ahead and qualified to run for for the Senate. Carl Vinson, who was a big man not only in my area but throughout the state in Washington, called me on the telephone, and of course Mr. Carl, he said, "Culver," said, "now you got no business running for the Senate." Said, "We've gotten out there and worked hard for you." Of course, Mr. Benson didn't do a thing to help the lieutenant governor. He says, "All you're going to do is get beat, Culver." Said, "I'm going to go out there and see that you don't get elected." Well, I told Mr. Benson, "Mr. Carr, you didn't help me for the lieutenant governor, and you're not going to tell me what to do in the Senate, and I'm going to run, and I'm going to win." Well, Mr. Carr worked mighty hard against me, and he was able to take Hancock County by 1 vote. That was one of the counties a senator named John Lewis had been elected. I had a fellow named Joe Lanier from over in Washington County was the one they picked to run against me, and I did lose that county. Wilkerson County, which Mr. Benson thought he would carry, I carried it, and I've carried it the 26 years that I have been running. Jones County, which a fellow named Bragg had already been elected to the Senate, that Mr. Benson thought he'd carry, but I carried Jones County also, and I carried Baldwin County overwhelmingly. So I was elected to the Senate and have been elected for the 26 years. Now, it was 12 years ago I had my first opposition. After the first time, I had a gentleman named George Lawrence, who had been the district attorney for the Okmulgee Circuit, which was identical to the counties that I had. At this time, my district had changed. I had lost Washington County. I had all the original counties, plus I had picked up Putnam, Jasper, and a very small portion of Morgan County, a place called Godfrey and Buckhead, which was just about 2,000 people.
Down around Lake Oconee?
Lake Oconee wasn't existing then, but it's up in that neck of the woods now. These 2 little sections of Morgan County do not get up to the lake. But I defeated George Lawrence, who ran a terrific race. He and his wife and all of his people, he was born in Wilkerson County. His dad had been a school teacher and a preacher in Wilkerson County. He had a brother that was school superintendent in Baldwin, and he was very well known. And I was very fortunate. I again took Hancock, Wilkerson, Baldwin, and very overwhelmingly, and Jones. But he was able to take Jasper, Putnam, and that little portion of Morgan. I took about 60% of the votes. Then I got by without any opposition till 6 years ago, and a doctor named Wilbur Ball who had been in the House for 8 years, ran against me. And we had just gone through reapportionment again, but the only change in my district was that I took over the entire county of Morgan. All the other counties were the same, which gave me 7 full counties. For some reason, I have been able to work with blacks for a long time. Try to represent everybody equally and see them all at any time I can see them. I might deviate here and just tell a little joke because I caught a albino catfish, a white catfish, weighed about 5 pounds, and put him on the walls to my office. But my senatorial district is about 60% black. Now that doesn't mean that that's as many as registered, but actual population. And they came in and said I was not being fair, that I had a white catfish up there, and I should have a black one. So I went out and caught a 16-pound black catfish and put it on the wall, so I don't have any fussing about my catfish. But getting back to Wilbur Ball's race, Wilbur thought that he could break even with me with the white votes, and if he could take the black vote, that he could win. So he had the first black campaign manager that I know of anyone having in my 25th senatorial district, or in fact with any race at that time. But we had a knockdown, drag out. It was a lot of hard feelings, a lot of talking. But again, I beat Wilbur just about like I did George Lawrence. I took about 58, 59% of the votes, and took all the counties. I took 6 of the counties. Wilbur took Morgan, which I just taken over the whole county, and I lost it by 81 votes. So I did not have any opposition for 6 years up until this year. And I still had the same 7 counties. And I took all 7 of them this year with 74% of the vote.
So 62, you came into the Senate. Sanders came into the governor's office.
That's correct.
How was your relations with Sanders, and what committees were you on?
Well, of course, we had a good relations with him. And, of course, we had a good relationship with the Lieutenant Governor at that time. Of course,
Lieutenant Governor Matter.
That's correct. And, of course, we had a group that we felt more or less that we ran the Senate. We had Senator Gillis. At that time,
Who were the Senate leaders during that?
Well, at that time, we had Gene Holly, Senator Holly from over in Augusta, Senator Gillis, and the other senators had more gone on. At that time, there was 23 of us had served time and were elected. Of that 23, there's only 3 of us left. And we had 4. Al Holloway died 3 years ago. He was the 4th one. The 3 original ones now is Paul Brown from over in Clark, Hugh Gillis, who has more time than I do. I have 38 years. Hugh Gillis has 40. Hugh didn't have to go to service, and I did. I blame it on that. But we had I think, did an excellent job doing Lester Matters because we did have a close relationship. We worked together very close. He listened to us, and we had good leadership. We had a boy named Malin London. It's amazing all the leaders that we thought possibly would end up being governor.
Were Maddox and Sanders at odds during that period, and did y'all kind of side with Maddox against him, or how did that
Well, not necessarily, but we were able to sort of do what we wanted. Now, Al Holloway turned up being, at one time, was the floor leader for Jimmy Carter, and later, and the majority leader. And, of course, we took that away from Al. And Al and I were off and on friends. Al was one of them that took the EREG committee away from me. Yet in later years, we were good friends up until his death. And, of course, Al was a good leader. Al handled our appropriation committee excellent. He was not the chairman, but he did all the work. He was on the conference committees, and he was a businessman. He was an astute businessman, and did a good job for us, and Al has been missed in that particular area. But we didn't have all those fights with the Senate House, you might say. Of course, you had George T. Smith got into the picture in later years, and of course he became the lieutenant governor after Maddox.
Was he in the Senate when you first came?
No, he was in the House. He was Speaker of the House. George was Speaker of the House, and then of course he really when we first came, and he ran against Peter Zack here, George Smith did. And George was very fortunate in that Peter Zack got 49% of the vote, but you had a boy over in from Athens, I believe his name was Bedingfield or something of that nature, got about 2% of the vote, which put George Smith in a runoff with Peter Zack. Well, everybody thought Peter Zack, who was the last of the parliamentarians, he handled himself well, he was brilliant, and knew the rules and regs. But he also, his activities away from the Capitol were somewhat questionable, and I think that's what caught up with him, and George beat him. No one thought he could, but when he got in the runoff, he beat him, and of course George, we got along fine with George. George did not support me, for an example, for the different committees that we have there. We have a policy committee that I ran for, and George supported somebody else. And after I beat him on that, we didn't have any problems, and we've been great friends when he later ran for governor. And of course, as he's being a judge, we're good friends even today.
One of the big things during that era was the reapportionment fight in the '64 session when Denmark Groover stopped the clock up there. Could you comment on that? Give us a little background.
Well,
on
of
that?
course, that was a big fight because Denmark and myself were very much interested in keeping what was known as this 6th congressional district, which was Carl Vinson's old district, sort of intact. And we had been able to keep it intact. When it came to 11:45, we came upstairs and started celebrating a little bit earlier. Denmark, myself, and others that were working with us. So what happens in the meantime is someone goes down and cuts the clock off and called us back in session. Well, Denny saw the clock was off, and it was illegal for us to go back in session, but we were supposed to go by the clocks that are in the Senate and House chambers. So this is when Denny reached over from the gallery in the House to turn the clock back on, and King was on about 2 fingers of probably breaking his neck. And this is a famous picture that Life magazine carried on the front, was Denny dangling from the balcony trying to reach the clock. Now
So he wasn't really trying to stop the clock. He was trying to restart it. Or
No,
finish
he
it.
was trying to stop it. See, they had you're correct. He was trying to start the clock, and they had stopped it. So they claimed he was stopping it, but he wasn't. So because we wanted to get it over, and because they came back and did us in. They beat us very badly and reworking the congressional district, and of course the 6th became the 8th, which it is today, and it's a monster. And when we reapportioned in '91, you're going to see, I'm sure, many, many changes in a lot of congressional districts, because we're hoping we're going to have 12 instead of 10.
In '66, we had the Maddox-Callaway governor's race, and it went to the
legislature.
Could you describe
Of course,
how that came out
this
and
was
why?
unusual. It never had happened before. And of course, it's a lot of people state that you have to get better than 50% to win. But this was another time when an ex-governor got about 3-4% of the votes, a write-in vote, and it stood in where Bo Callaway did not get 50%. And naturally, with the legislature being a Democratic legislature, it was no fight at all. But this was the shining moment of Peter Zack's ability to be a parliamentarian. If the election had been after that affair, I think Peter Zack could have beat anyone because he handled it great. He was a great statesman, and of course, Lester Maddox was elected.
Was that strictly on party lines, or did
That
any
was-
Democrats support Callaway?
It might have been one or two, but it wasn't enough to make much difference. I don't think any. I think it was strictly on party lines, and that Bo got very few votes.
It wasn't similar, like you'd mentioned. I've heard several people when at the original two governors fight between Talmadge and M.E. Thompson, they were offering concessions, trying to gain legislation.
That's
Was there
correct.
any of that went on in the Maddox-Callaway? Did Callaway try to offer concessions?
I don't
or?
think so. Now, I had talked to Bo Callaway. In fact, I had some of my constituents. This was before the race. Would have supported him, wanted to support him. But Bo, when this man went in, this friend of mine, and he wanted to donate to Bo's campaign, and he kept somebody in the office with him. In other words, this man could not talk to him man to man. And he left there mad at Bo, and he didn't make the donation to Bo. And I think this happened in a lot of cases where Bo might have won without a runoff if he had been a better statesman or politician in relating to people rather than, I don't know what kind of phobia he might have had, but he did not relate well with people when they came in to talk to him about supporting him. But now I know of Lester Maddox was not one to make deals.
Right.
He was possibly about the honest man we've ever had, and he ran it that way. He maybe didn't accomplish as much as others because the word compromise was not necessarily in his vocabulary. He was something like I was when I first came up here. I thought right was right, and that's the way it would go. But after getting my head blooded pretty regular for about 6 years, I felt like compromise was a word and not right.
It's been suggested that since Governor Maddox had been an outsider, more or less, in regard to the legislature.
Well,
when he came to
he had
office.
been more or less, he thought of him sort of like a clown. He had the old pickwick, and he went around with the axe handles, and he went around and had little jelly jars for people to put pennies in to help him run. But he was energetic. He related to the people, and he saw the people. He shook the hand. Now, Lester Maddox, can't remember anybody's name. He always called him Big Boy, Chief, but he always called him something and patted him on the back, and consequently, he was a friend of the people of the state of Georgia.
I've heard it suggested that you really became powerful during his administration, that y'all were allies.
Well, of course,
he
it's
did
what
a lot of progressive things during his administration.
Well, we saw that he did great because we were able to work together because we had a bad moment there. A good friend of mine, Bobby Rowan, was the floor leader for Lester Maddox in the Senate. Bobby, as you know, is running today for Public Service Commission.
From Enigma, Georgia, right?
From Enigma, Georgia. We always called it Enema, Georgia. But Bobby and Lester got crossed, and he resigned. But Lester did a lot of good. Lester did not relate like other governors have, and he didn't have the green door or the gold door or any kind of door. Everything was open door with him. And we enjoyed working with him. We enjoyed working with him in the Senate. And the other day he called me on the phone and he sent me his book on the caucus, of which I'll give you a copy.
Thank you, sir.
Take that and read
I hope to enter him here soon.
He says, be a leader, call to duty.
I found it ironic that Dukakis is being one of the things they're roasting him about is that prisoner release program, which Governor Maddox had something quite similar to here.
Well, of course, you've got many states got something similar to it, and the federal government definitely exactly like it. But you always pick what you figure is the tender spot or the Achilles heel. Now, the first time I ran against a man, used as his spot was that he had not voted for the farmers to get the tax off of gasoline. And even though we don't have many farmers in Baldwin County, we were able to capitalize on his failure to vote on this.
Right. When Sanders ran against Carter in 1970, did you take any particular interest in that?
Yes, we were very much for Sanders, and he ran a very poor race. people don't particularly remember what you did yesterday. It's what you're going to do tomorrow. And Carl Sanders ran a race like, I'm doing you a favor, you the people of Georgia. I was good governor. I did a good job. And I'm going to do another one for you, so you're very lucky to get me back in there. And he ran, this was his signs, this was his attitude. And when he woke up in the runoff race and rolled up his sleeves and started politicking, the train had already run over him. But Carl would have made a good governor for another 4-year term, or he'd already been a good governor. But politics is very fickle.
Did Carter alienate the whole legislature with his style, would you say, when he first
Yes,
came in? Because he didn't
after
seem to...
his first year, of course, he did not relate. He more or less dominated, ran over it.
And this change, he was different when he was in the Senate.
Well, it's just like we stated, he was a fine senator for 4 years. But as Roy Harris said, getting back to that desk did something to him. And he was not a likable governor to the members of the General Assembly.
Was he not a compromiser?
No, he was very domineering. There was only one way, and that was his way. And he was very pushy, and he used the strength of the governor's office to do what he wanted, just like in bringing about Department of Human Resources and other areas that he dominated, more or less, the whole thing.
You've been here before, during, and after his term. How would you evaluate his reorganization program? What's it done or not done?
Because we feel like it was a calamity, naturally, as we are today. And we feel like it also has cost millions and millions of dollars, that this was not a good plan, and he should have seen it was not a good plan and made changes in it, because it was doing the latter part of his administration that you couldn't get the certified audit. Yet before, when it was old health and welfare, they had a good audit. They checked out to the dot. They had good people over there. But yet when he moved in, they didn't fire them. They just put them in a closet and wouldn't let them work.
Did that program strengthen the executive vis-a-vis the legislative, do you think?
Well, of course, the legislative branch of government has really never, this is my estimation, of course, exerted itself and been a strong third branch. Through the years, you have seen somewhat a dilution of the executive branch. When I first came in 1947, of course, it was nothing but the executive branch at that time. They would go in on the last year. We didn't require a budget every year. You could make one budget and it could go on until you made another one. So the governor, chances are, wouldn't even let the legislature meet in his lame duck year. So the executive branch was it. But as we've gone through this 40 years that I've been up here, the judicial branch is the one that's grown in strength. And the legislative branch has become more knowledgeable, better qualified, better educated, but at the same time, they are not the third strong branch of government that we're supposed to be. This is one of the reasons we're pushing for the 4-year term, that we feel like the way we're electing this, and this has not been pushed, that the legislature will be elected on the off years from the governor. Now, you can feature, you as a new member of either house, coming in when the governor is elected, and of course you have run on many promises and a platform, and you feel like you've got to get in with the governor to carry out some of these promises. So you're beholden to him, and he's able to get you to follow certain programs that he's for that maybe you might be against. But since you're new, you're trying to find the toilet and the post office, you go along with him. But with the 4-year term, Amendment 2, you will be in office 2 years before the governor comes in. So to me, this means you're going to have a strong, independent legislative branch, which you should have, that can hold its own with the executive branch better than what we have today with 2 years and being elected at the same time with the governor, and then being elected again for 2 years, and the governor's already been in 2 years.
So would you say that Governor Busby and Governor Harris have been stronger vis-a-vis the legislature because of the reorganization, and y'all need to compensate now?
Well, of course, they have been strong because we still let them have certain areas which I think that we, the legislative branch, should have it. And what is the right way? I cannot project it now. Your news media seems to think that the governor should appoint everything. I don't think so. I think that the legislature should have a better opportunity of appointing some of the positions, such as, we'll say, DOT, although we got it under a board, but the way the House outweighs the Senate, we don't know how long we're going to have an independent board. The Revenue Commissioner, now of course we elect the auditor, and we've done this and had no problem through the years of the legislature outright electing the auditor. But I feel like that many of these department heads, that there should be some weighted method where the Senate has the same vote as the House, but the House doesn't have 180 to 56 votes. And yet this is one of the reasons we've never had the Overview Committee. They want to be weighted on these committees. They are weighted on the congressional districts in voting for DOT members because they have more people in each one of them. They have about 25% more votes. But none of us have particularly been happy with the Public Service Commission. And we put in bills. We've tried to see how can you make the Public Service Commission more answerable, more responsive. Well, we've discussed it, all right. We'll let 2 congressional districts elect 1 public service man. Well, the feeling if you did that is that then they will not care what's happening to the rest of the state. They're just going to deal with those 2 congressional districts. So therefore you defeated your purpose. We could suggested appointing them. Of course, it's been suggested by the news media, some of them, that the governor appoint them. Well, I think this is wrong, too. And what is right with the Public Service Commission, other than what we're doing now, I don't know, but I do think there's a better way. And the same way I feel throughout government that the legislative branch of government needs to be strengthened. At the present time, about the only time that we have any clout is during the 3 months we're in session. That's when we're handling the budget. That's when department heads are sort of beholden to the members of the General Assembly to give me money. But just about the time you go home, then you have a dickens of time getting him on the phone to return calls or getting anything else accomplished.
Just a few more things here. What about the Henry Grady Hotel and its place in Georgia government history? Is that exaggerated or?
Oh no, the Henry Grady would be unbelievable. Of course, you look back in the old days of different meeting places in other states, and that was the same way with the Henry Grady. The Henry Grady was the political hotbed for the state of Georgia for many, many years. They gave the Speaker of the House, and of course we didn't have the Lieutenant Governor most of the time, but later on we did, a short time before it was torn down. But the Speaker was a big man, and he had nearly a floor up there, and you would have big get-togethers. You would have Sunday night dinners up there. Every Sunday night would be at the Grady. You had 80% of the members of the General Assembly stayed there. This was back when the House was 205 members. Personally, I stayed there just 1 week. When you got in there, it was impossible to get the ice. You couldn't get the telephone, or they're all busy. People that might have been imbibing was knocking on the door, and you got no peace. So I left there after the first week and went down to the Georgian on Lucky Street, which quite a few did, and we had at one time about 45 numbers had moved to the Georgian. But the Henry Grady was where, for an example, when Herman was elected, now not when he was appointed, but elected to his first 2-year term, Herman had a practice of going out and enjoying himself, and he had not showed up at the Henry Grady for 3 weeks after election. Roy Harris was up there and all his lieutenants and other people. So a group of the young bucks, about myself, which we were about 34 years of age then, and we, about 8 of us, got in 2 cars, went down to Lovejoy, and met with Herman, and told him he was letting us down. You know, all these people were coming to see him, and he had to get up to the Henry Grady. So he said he'd come, and we set everything up so that he wouldn't be able to get any Coca-Cola, and we thought we had everything fine, and each one of us had our speech. We were going to go tell him, now look, you got to go down the straight and narrow path and do this. Well, all the political talking into Henry Grady took place in the toilet. I think that was because most of the time after you got through, they flushed it and didn't remember a thing you said. But I went in to talk to Herman, and it must have been 15 towels on the rack. And he dug underneath and found his Coca-Cola bottle. And, you know, the old type glasses they had in hotels then. He poured it full of Coca-Cola and looked down it. And he said, Culver, what did you want to say? And of course, what I wanted to say was, lay off that Coca-Cola bottle. And I said, I've forgotten, Governor. And I left, but the Henry Grady was the place, and we had some big times up there.
Chief, what about your tradition of gift giving to legislators?
Well, we thought this was great time. We enjoyed it. We got some lieutenant governors down the line, became media conscious, and thought that possibly somebody would jump on them for taking time out. But what we did in the closing minutes of the last night of the session, we would take off about 45 minutes or an hour and give gifts to, would give the lieutenant governor a nice gift. But then we would take and try to follow, like we'll say, Julian Webb, who later was a judge and retired. We would give him something that typified it. Roy Smalley was one that amended every bill. So we gave him a plaque with a pair of scissors on it. And the man that changed his vote on Department of Human Resources, we gave him a pluck rubber chicken. So we felt like he was a chicken. One fella walked around like he had a cob up you know what, so we gave him a corn cob out of a faucet so he could pull it out. But we gave the lieutenant governor at one time, Joyce Smith, who more or less brought it to an end, we gave him a greased pig with a red ribbon around it. And he would never pick up the pig. He gave it to Bobby Rohan, and I think Bobby got $50 for the pig. But George got sort of leery about the news media, so we changed it and didn't have it in the Senate chamber and went into the judicial chamber, the old judge's chamber, and did it for a couple more years, but it involved a lot of my time. I was the one that put it on. We'd take up $10 or $20 from every member of the Senate, and to go out and think up something for each and every one of them, those that were highlighted, took quite a bit of time. So we haven't done it in years, but now during that time, when Lester was the governor, we had someone had brought in quite a few cases of Coca-Colas, and they were in one of the rooms up on the 4th floor. And the Senate was still meeting. The House was waiting to sign it die when we got through. And in this room, there was a lot of people, a lot of members of the House, very few senators. I happened to go up there to see how things were getting along, and Lester came by and opened the door. Well, the next morning, it came out on TV and the radio that Senator Kidd was running a den of iniquity on the 4th floor of the Capitol. Well, of course, as I told you, he couldn't remember anybody's name. but mine, the rest of them were chief and big boy. Well, 3 days later, one of your television stations called me in Millersville, said, we'd like to give you equal time with Lester on his accusations. I said, fine. So they came down, and we were sitting in my office, and the fellow was questioning me. He said, now, Senator Kidd, do you remember anyone that was in the room at the time that Lester came in? I said, yes. He said, who was it? I said, that man operating your camera there. Because he said, cut, 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 and we never made that tape. But that guy was the drunkest one in the room. And because later, Lester tried to give me a little problem, but he found out he couldn't get too far, and we got to be good friends despite the den of iniquity.
What about the toga part?
Well, the toga part was them getting equal with me. That was some of the senators that I had been picking on, giving them things for little errors they might have made. So they decided at the party they were going to fix me. So I had invited a bunny girl to come over. Now, of course, she had a mother or somebody was with her. But we had a bunny girl over here because at that time we had 4 or 5 of our senators would spend a lot of time on that.
At the last session in your the 38 bills that you got through both houses last time.
Well, this was really, as I say, quite a session. Of course, I became involved with a bill in the closing end that dealt with nearly all your professions. They called it the Christmas tree bill because I had so many different professions we were trying to take care of, and we passed the Christmas tree bill, but most of the ornaments had been taken off of it before we got that far. But we were dealing, for an example, with physician assistants. Now, the doctors predominate physician's assistants, but yet physician's assistants are so important in rural areas where you can't get doctors, and they do play a very important part, and they need to be able to do certain things that they can't do with a doctor's direction or talking to a doctor on the telephone. So they came to me, and I took this bill. Fact is, I handled legislation for them about 6 years ago, which got them the first recognition they ever had. But I felt like this was a needed area, and we worked on it. But we failed to pass this bill, but we got the attention of the doctors. And the board, through rules and regs, have given physician's assistants practically everything I asked for in the bill. Now we can go back. Let me cover a couple of old things real quick.
Good.
Many years ago, I'd say 12, I was asked to introduce a bill giving doctor osteopathy, ODs, the same recognition as medical doctors, which medical doctors were very opposed to it. Yet the federal government and Walter Reed Hospital had ODs on their staff, and they were recognizing them to be qualified to take the medical exam or to be licensed since 1942. Now, prior to 1942, ODs got a lot of manipulation training, such as chiropractic. But after 42, their training was strictly medical. So I took a committee and went to Kirksville, Kansas. That was one of the OD schools. And we spent 4 days out there going through that school. Then we went to Philadelphia, which was an OD school. And we spent 3 or 4 days going there. And then we went to the medical college in Augusta. And we found that the curriculum, the requirements of the OD school was much stiffer than the medical school. But yet when I put the bill in to give them equal recognition, the doctors of the state of Georgia wrote me up as trying to ruin the medical profession at that time. Now, of course, since then, ODs are recognized. They do have a member of the medical board, and evidently I was born before my time. Well, another example of this is what was known as GSCW. It was originally known as GNIC. in Milledgeville, a woman's college, that had about 1,600 girls at its zenith. But it got where female schools were not very attractive, and it went down to about 400. So I put in a bill to make it coeducational. Well, I went home on the weekend, on Friday night, and I was in the drugstore, which is right in the middle of town, a block and a half away from the college. And here comes, it looks like all 1,600 students came down to the drugstore and more or less bodily picked me up, carried me back up to the college, put me on the stage, threw oranges, eggs, everything, burnt me in effigy out on the campus, and just gave me hell for recommended that we save the school by going coeducational. 6 years later, it went coeducational, and the man that did it got a big plaque and a lot of recognition, and nobody remembers all the rotten eggs and oranges thrown at old Culver some 6 years prior, and today is known as Georgia College at Milledgeville with 8,000 students there. So again, I just think I'm a little before my time.
Who's going to be the next governor? So is your colleague
Well, you're going to have
Miller going to be the next
You're
governor?
going to have right now, I would say that Zell Miller and Max Cleland are the leading candidates. But people have got to remember that it's going to take, this is terrible. We need to make some changes. It'll take a Democratic candidate to run for governor 2 years from now, $5 million. Now you say, why? You'll run in the primary, and if you've got these four people that are saying they're going to run, you definitely will have a runoff. Then you're going to have Republican opposition. So you won't have to run 3 races. So money is going to be a big issue, going to mean a lot to who gets elected. But Zell certainly has better statewide recognition. Max Cleland is next. But now Bubba McDonald is working very hard. Roy Barnes is working hard. And the fact is, I was just talking to a senator on the phone, and they had a golf match down in Vidalia. And who should show up but Roy Barnes and Bubba McDonald? And neither one of them played golf, but they did shake a lot of hands and eat with the people down there. So it's going to be an interesting race. The thing that worries me is you also going to have 4, 5, 6 or more running for lieutenant governor. And how is this going to affect passing good legislation, maybe needed tax increases during the next 2 years? Is a citizen of Georgia, is Georgia itself going to suffer due to hot politics? I certainly hope not. But we've got an interesting 2 years, and it will be a tough 2 years.
Do you foresee the Republican Party becoming a real force in Georgia politics anytime in the not distant future?
Well, yes, they definitely. You take, they have come from none, and the Senate, for example, to 10. And they are definitely going to elect more, possibly this year. Now, this depends how fast. If the Democrats win in November this year, then, of course, it'll slow them up. But according to polls, and I'm not a believer in polls, we go back to think of Truman, and I don't necessarily believe in endorsements. Majority of the times I've run, the news media have not endorsed me, and yet I have won. So if the Republicans win, you're going to see a lot, in my opinion, Republican members of the General Assembly elected this November, and 4 years from now, you will definitely, of course, 2 years from now, you'll definitely see someone, a Republican, run for governor. And he could really be in there, because they seem to have the financing, and some of the people's names that have been mentioned, like Johnny Isaacson, very popular, very knowledgeable, very capable. And he could be a contender 2 years from now.
What about your future? How long are you going to stay up here? Do you have
Well,
any
of course,
plans,
you know, I have a son that thinks he ought to be running for the state senate. I have a daughter who is the mayor, vice mayor of Jacksonville. It's sort of unusual with her is that she's a Republican. She's the first female to be vice mayor and the first Republican. But I think my son thinks he ought to sort of go along since my oldest daughter. But I think one idiot in the family is enough, and I hope my son doesn't. I would like, really, as long as my health is good and I can continue to be active and remember from one day to the next, I said that's about the best I can do, is to be around maybe 4 years at the most. Might end up at 2 if we can't get the 4-year term in. You get a little frustrated as you get older because you see things that you feel should have been done, and you're not able to, other people realize it. So you start beating on the wall and saying, am I spinning my wheel, and why can't I get it accomplished? And this sort of makes you wonder.
You've achieved an awful lot. You've been a wonderful interview, Senator Kidd.
Well, it's
Thank
been
you very
nice.
much.